Hey everyone, Darkantos here, and today we'll be covering the second part of this tutorial on scenario making, objects placements and their tools. So picture this: armies clashing, villages bustling with activity, and serene forests filled with wildlife. Sounds exciting, right? That's object placement for you. Though one thing for sure, you don't want to get too carried away with the aesthetical point. We're making a playable scenario at the end of the day, and neither do you want to make a bland world with objectively lifeless gameplay. Balancing gameplay and design is key. Units create big battles and are also the core of the experience. Buildings define the atmosphere of the map, but are also strategic hubs. Their placement is crucial to gameplay, and nature elements, as much as they add immersion, they may also be obstacles on the map, or an unfair advantage. With that said, let's dive into the tools and techniques to craft a vibrant, well-balanced map. With the Objects Placement tool, we'll be adding some ambience, rocks, animals, and other small details to the terrain we painted previously. And as promised, we'll be building a big city. Well, not crazy big, just big enough to cover city tile A. First things off, we will set up the perimeter of work using walls. So here you have two options. You may use the good old Trojan wall. It's fancy, it's big, and it's very cinematic. The only problem with Trojan structure is that you have to place it one by one. And even then, you might want to do some tweaking. We'll see how that goes. And if your city in your campaign isn't Troy, well, you have to go around renaming every wall and gate in the city. Or you can use the good old wooden wall. That comes in a variety of options. Just make sure to pre-upgrade it beforehand. Of course, we'll be seeing all of that. So what will it be, Trojan or regular? So since the first option is what most people go for, well, we'll go with the latter. So now that we've picked our choice of wall, we will zoom out for a more panoramic view using the zoom tool. And since I forgot to mention in my previous video something as important as the zooming tool, so here's how it goes. You may use the plus or minus symbols on your numpad to zoom in or out. And if you don't have those, you can just use the mouse scroll, which is way more practical in both cases. As for the unlimited zooming option that I use, you can access it from the cinematic editor over here. Focus with me here on the pitch editor. Don't look at the rest, we'll get to it when it's time. Here you can pick the maximum zoom allowed. I personally go for 400. For me it's the perfect balance of overall view and not too small for me to work with. Additionally, you may rotate the map using control, plus arrows, left and right. Notice that this only applies if you play on Extended Edition. On Titans, you'll be able to rotate the map using the mouse scroll. So as mentioned previously, we'll first set up a perimeter with the walls. Another cool feature about the wooden walls is that it has a place wall tool. Two things to mention when playing with walls. First, wall alignment. It's very important to keep the walls going straight. You don't want your city to look funny now, do you? So just keep an eye out and make sure there's no aliasing appearing. If it helps, you may also keep an eye on the city tile and try to trace your walls on top of it directly. That way, you won't get out of line. Notice that you may use the camera pitch, put it on 90 degrees, so you can keep an eye on the city tile even easier. Second thing to mention is the connectors. While placing walls using the wall tool, notice that some connections will be generated automatically. Once again, the wall tool is just a pre-made tool made by the editor to place walls in their connectors. It utilizes 4 objects: short wall, medium walls, long walls, and wall connectors. Whenever it deems that one of these has been created, it will attempt to put a connector there. Sometimes it's not the most aesthetical thing to look at, so you want to have control over those connectors, you don't have them all over the place. So if there's another wall built from the other end, you might want to shorten your current placement, so you don't land with 3 or 2 connectors in a very short wall. Something like this.
Yeah!
To sum it up, you want to keep an eye on the wall connectors, to keep them aesthetically correct somehow. Next thing, we'll divide the different quarters of the city. Each one has its own style of building a town or city, of course, and I'm in no shape a mastermind when it comes to city making. But I'm used to establishing a perimeter for the various corners of a civilization. Military, royal palace, marketplace, etc. So simply imagine it and start tracing. Or for my case, I keep modifying as I go. Note that you may use the unit copy or pass tools to keep the symmetry going between 2 adjacent walls. This is very useful, especially on the main entrance, where walls need to be identical on both sides. Notice that sometimes you might land on a wall that you did not pay attention to, but it wouldn't be that obvious. But you may just extend to it using a connector, or you can delete the wall and try to reshape it again using a smaller one. Applying the same rules that we previously saw, I'll be now setting up walls to divide the city into different districts or quarters. Notice that every now and then I'll be stumbling across an anomaly. I mean, you may take your time to prevent anything similar, but you may also ignore the small mistakes and fix them later on. Now that we're done dividing the city, we're going to assign each part to its purpose. We will simply put buildings to keep in mind what's supposed to be there. And while putting the buildings out there, we might as well convert certain walls to gates. The most obvious ones, of course. If you go to the Place Object tool, just below Place Wall, you'll find Convert Gate. Notice that if a wall is too small, it will not be converted. You may also convert many walls at once by mass selecting them with Shift. So this is what we're looking at right now. This here will be a military corridor, expanding all the way out here. Over here we'll have a worship corridor, will be temples, shrines, statues, and tributes. All the way to the middle will be put in fortresses. Of course, you can always rotate buildings using the mouse scroll. Or if the rotation is not sensitive enough to what you're trying to achieve, you may just place the object and use the Move Object tool. So this, not only does it allow you to move objects into restricted areas, like so, you may also use the control and arrows to rotate the objects even slower. Here at the beginning we got sentry towers, to keep the city on the defensive, along with 2 fortresses. Of course there's always room for more fortresses, but you're trying to be as much realistic as possible. After all, this is not a random map game. Over here, we have archery range. Of course for archers to be at the doors and ready their arrows. Further away, we have stables, military academies, and just the one archery range. Just below, the temple, as mentioned before, will be adding shrines and other features and embellishments to it. On the other side, we've put houses all over the place. Notice that I kept the houses away from the doors. Just below here, we have granaries and farms. We may open a path later on here to gold mines, and we can do the same here towards the water for docks, and the rest of this area is dedicated to the market, which will be very animated once we get our hands on units. We'll leave this space right here for the town center. I wouldn't want to be placing it right now since we still have a lot of designs and cosmetics to go through, and they might get in the way. Finally, we'll be placing the wonder in the middle, presumably the royal building of the city. I usually pick Poseidon, cause his wonder looks the closest to this description. Also, very important, make sure to use the special wonder unit and not the regular wonder, which actually triggers the 10 minutes win condition. You don't want that happening, of course, in your scenario. Well, although victory conditions can be disabled via the editor, you're just better off using the special wonder instead. So after making a few adjustments, I will now start adding small details such as statues, torches, columns and flags. I personally always start with these respectfully in this order. They just give you an idea about how detailed the city looks thus far, and they make your vision clearer about what you would want to add next. Kicking off with torches, there isn't that much depth to their placement, aside from sheer logic. Place torches in areas that would need lighting in the city, mainly gate edges and city corners. If it helps, you may also set the lighting to a darker tone, just to help you make your decisions. On that note, torches can be varied to either small or big size. Which one you want to use depends on your preference, but I recommend using the big variants for gates and corners, and smaller ones for less important entrances and areas like the population district. Oppress the people. Now moving on to statues. Since the major god here is Poseidon, we have 2 options. Either the usual statue of major god or statue of Poseidon object from the Fall of the Trident campaign, which also has 2 variants. But we won't be using this one cause, well, we need a trident. Statues are a sign of worship and dedication to the god. They should be placed in the most corners of the city, and they always look pretty, so there isn't much holding back on their placement. Gates, temples, royal district, and even working areas. As a sign of blessing, the bigger statues from the campaign, we'll save those for the wonder, and why not even pull off an Atlantis and put one in the water? After making the docks, of course. And we can also use those for the temple district. Also, if you're looking for a moderate size, you can always increase or decrease the size of an object to make mythical units bigger for like a boss fight, or just bigger buildings in general. This is also very helpful when you're making a cinematic, and you need a certain perspective for certain objects and buildings. Simply press K and hold it to increase the size, or Shift and K to decrease it. Also, using the Position Object tool, you can make some unique visuals by placing objects in certain areas that were restricted before, like placing statues on top of the wall directly. Next up is columns. I believe the common use differs from one pantheon to another. For example, Egyptian columns are straight up pillars that can be used in an alley, city walls, or to lead the way, while Greek ones have a more godly and worshiping aesthetic. That doesn't mean that you can't use them outside of temples and shrines, but Greek columns are just too fancy. Norse ones are the ugliest, pillars of rubble. But still, the Norse definitely win on torches. Their torches are the most versatile in use, given their plain and simple design. Since we're in a Greek setting, I'm gonna cover their columns for now. Columns most of the time go in pairs, whether they serve as pillars for a temple or just an additional design for a statue. You wanna place them symmetrically and adjacent. Here in the military quarter, for instance, we'll leave some room in between for flags, which will come right after. So following these two notions, this is what we ended up with. Flags are easier to place around, whenever there is a space in between two objects. You may insert one there, although I try to keep flags as a symbol of power, therefore I put them only in major city gates, and the royal quarter. It can be done differently like we've seen in the campaign, but to each their own of course. And that brings us to the three types of flags. We got small, medium, and big. And surprisingly there are also numbered flags. But in a real campaign there's no way you'll be using these we're in ancient times, unless you're making a random map just for multiplayer of course. So starting with the most common ones, the medium size. As mentioned previously, we'll be putting them in any available spaces we saved. This also applies to the bigger variant, but that one we keep exclusively for the entrance and the Wonder District, to emphasize its majestic structure. We may also use the bigger ones at the entrance of the military. Finally, the small flags will serve in population and market districts. It can just be placed in front of doors or houses. Now before moving on to units, we'll be adding some small additional details that would give a unique feeling to each quarter. So starting with the military, we'll be putting the weapons next to the armory. You may also add a rocky fence to define the smith's work. And why not some dirt terrain below it? Speaking of terrain, we'll be coming back to it to paint certain aspects of the city. Over here at the worship quarter, we'll be putting tributes to the statues of Poseidon. Food crates, flowers, goats, weapons, anything that would please the Lord of the Seven Seas. You may also sneak in a relic there for gameplay purposes, and you can even make Poseidon get pissed about it if you ever steal it, but we'll see that on triggers. Here next to fortresses, you can use broken siege weapons. There's a beauty to it, as if they are under mechanical maintenance, but just avoid using the ones that are literally broken. Here in civilian houses, you can just use rugs, crates, pottery, and misc object, which is literally animal hide of course. If you grew tired of just putting objects all over the place, you can just use the copy-paste object tool. Just gather an assemble of rugs, crates, and then you can just pass them all over the place. That's what I did at least. Though you might want to be careful because some objects might delete others and you will have to replace them. Down here in the market you can place some market stalls, crates, and tents to give you a feeling of activity. Of course we'll be putting some villagers and traders later on when we get to units. And finally, the Wonder Quarter, we'll be putting fountains. Of course, fountains come in three types, but I prefer these square ones. Now that we're done with cosmetics, we can use some decorative terrain, such as city tile water. This terrain can be used to make things look fancy. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the Royal District, but we may also use it on the Worship Quarter. Although the city tile water can be very confusing in its use, you'll soon realize while painting with it that sometimes its vertical tile becomes horizontal, and the other way around. That's mainly due to the camera angle, but you'll get the hang of it. Please do, cause I never did. While we are at it, we might as well add a shrine here in the Worshipping District, which of course serves no purpose but aesthetics again. On the same Worship District and the Wonder, we can put some regular grass we've seen before in the previous video. It breaks the heavy tone of city tile, and it shows how truly committed we are to maintaining Poseidon statues. But yeah, just don't overdo it. Also, since this video already took a while, I took the liberty to make the dock and mining camps I mentioned earlier, off recording. For the dock I simply made an additional wall to perimeter around it, added a mixture of grass and city tile, then placed the building. I also added a naval shipyard, which is again only for show. For the gold mine, I used the cliff tool to lower the elevation to a maximum, adjusted the edges with the smoothing tool, changed the terrain to pure dirt, placed the gold mines, storehouses for the upcoming villagers, added a few torches and a statue of Lord Poseidon to supervise the operation. Now for the units. As I mentioned earlier, it is important to keep the balance between gameplay and design, so we won't go around placing military all over the place. We'll leave it for the player to train them, and give them just something to get started with. We'll start with the simpler ones, villagers. It is only natural to have certain villagers assigned to certain tasks around the city, so we'll be placing 4 of them here at farms, and while we're at it, we'll give them a few goats to herd. Same thing for the gold mines, we'll put a few villagers that will get to work. Note that you can't put villagers to a task in the editor and expect them to stay at it upon playing the scenario, cause Well, growing up I thought that was the case for a while, but you'll have to assign them using the trigger. That, along with unit upgrades, starting age, and other basics of gameplay, we'll see them in the trigger editor. I just realized that I've never made a lumber camp, so we're gonna fix it using what we learned previously. We'll start by sampling the flat terrain and apply it to the cliff. Next up, by sampling the grass and the road around it, we'll turn the rocky terrain into walkable land. Since these farms are getting in the way, we'll just move them away until we're done remaking the wall and converting the gate. We'll close around the trees using another wall. Finally, we'll add a few villagers and storehouses, and we're gonna give them a sentry to protect them. Next up, we'll be putting villagers in the worship quarter to worship and pray, because that's what Poseidon wants, if you want Poseidon's blessing. While still in the context of villagers, we'll be adding some fishing ships here, and of course, there'll be no fishing ships without fish, so that's what we gotta add first. 3 fishing ships should do, and just like the other villagers, we'll get them to work using triggers eventually. Now, using villagers from different cultures, we'll add some ambience to the market. First we'll go to scenario, then player data. By the way, this is where you can change gods, player names, and starting resources, etc. I will cover this part along with triggers in another video. So here we'll choose players 7 or 8, since we don't want to be controlling these units. Let's pretend and rename them to travelers or traders. Then we'll head over to diplomacy. You gotta make sure they're neutral or ally, so we don't kill them as soon as the game starts. And the other way around. So apply ally to diplomacy both ways. Player 1 to 7 and 8. Player 7 and 8 to 1. Also player 7 and 8 between each other, so they won't be hostile to one another. We're choosing ally and not neutral, since we want them to use our gates if they want to. Well, not that they'll be moving much. And right after that, of course, you just want to place a bunch of villagers all over the place with different cultures. Norse, Egyptian, doesn't really matter. As long as it's giving away that feeling of travelers from all over the world in the marketplace. Now moving on to military units, the best way to go and to not lose ourselves is to place a handful, if not a couple of units, in front of each building that trains it. That way the city won't be ghost town, and we won't have an army at the start. So here for instance, we'll place Taxaris and 1 Prodromos for the fortress. Usually in my own campaigns I'd make a ballista. I just love ballistas so much. Of course we'll be applying the same thing here for this military academy. We'll add a couple of hoplites. And for the other military, we'll be using Hippaspists, since we don't want to always have hoplites. For the stables, put a few Hippicons. Now for the worshipping district, since this is Poseidon, we'll put a couple Cyclops to protect the statues in the shrine. And in the middle, none other than Polyphemus. All the way up to the Wonder District, the one and only Hero Cyclops. You can imagine this is an alternate timeline, but we'll put Gargarensis as the main character. And to his sides, flanking him, we'll put a couple Cyclops warriors. Now just a quick touch of Mother Nature, adding rocks and the hunt. You may also add grass and bushes, but I don't want to put too much details out there, since eventually I'll be adding antagonists or enemies. And let's not forget about the statue of Poseidon in the ocean that I promised to deliver. And let's make 2 of those instead of just the 1. Poseidon is very present within these lands. And with this video comes to an end. All objects are in place, and all what we gotta do now is put a system to operate everything. If you have any suggestions to add or any question, please do not hesitate to let me know in the comments section. Your feedback is very much appreciated to improve the quality of content. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to help me push through the algorithm. I'll see you on the next one. Trigger editing. Sorry, but I just had to.